Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and tonight's video is going to be looking at Heroic and I guess a little bit of Mythic Aberrus from a Warlock POV and discussing each fight. I guess spec-wise, damage profile-wise, if we're good, if we're bad, all of the above. Now, all of the heroic bosses except for Scale Commander, Sarkaleth, and these Dakali Invasion, whatever it's called, have been tested on Heroic. Invasion's been canceled twice. Sarkaleth won't be tested. And we've begun testing Mythic. We've tested two bosses so far, Kazara and Zaskarn. Now, some fights change a good bit on Mythic, some don't. So depending on what happens, I'll highlight it a bit here. Might make a second video later on. But for now, this is going to be looking at all the Heroic testing and talking about my initial impressions and feelings on the raid for Warlock. Now, as always, any weak Warriors, add-ons, or profiles you see in the video, links to Twitch and Discord down below are up for free for you guys. And like usual, I also want to give one huge shout out to my patrons. Guys, thank you a million times for all support on Patreon. I really appreciate it. If you're looking at supporting on Patreon, there should be a link up here as well as down below. And in a week's time, I will indeed have the 10.1 Warlock PTR spreadsheet up on Patreon. If you're interested in that, the tier 3 Felguard rank or higher gets early access to that. So that being said, let's just get right into it. Kazara is the first boss you'll encounter in Aberrus, and this fight is a pure single target patchwork encounter. So Destro, Demonology, Affliction, everybody can put out good single target damage. I ended up playing Affliction here. This is early testing, where it ended up being fine. This is actually Mythic here. The big difference between Heroic and Mythic is that when the lasers spawn on players, they need to be kited into these pools in the ground surrounding my character here to basically be removed from the fight. On Heroic, I believe they despawn after like half a minute or so, probably less than that, about 10 seconds. But the big thing here on Mythic, if they aren't kited into the pools, they will chase the player until they are. It ends up being quite the mess the longer the fight goes, because more lasers spawn, you don't have as many pools. But as far as a Warlock POV felt in this fight, Destro felt good if you didn't get mechanics on you. Destro is the highest moving spec in the game, but unfortunately having to move more than 5 yards means your damage is actually terrible. Af felt fine in single target, lots of mobility, and Demonology felt pretty good as well. So honestly, all three specs here are fine. I'd likely lean towards Af and Demonology just due to the fact that you can move a good bit and they're both good in single target. But at the same time, depending on if Destro gets changes to its mobility, it could be a pretty strong choice in this fight. But Locke looks good here overall, just in general. Patchwork, single target fight, and a pretty good first boss overall. Molgoth is one of the earlier bosses in this raid, and if you remember Fellhounds of Sargeras from Antorus, this fight is similar to that. You have a fire ad and a shadow ad, and standing within a certain radius of them gives you stacks. You can see in my character here, I have both a fire stack and a shadow stack. We put the casters that can cleave in the middle of the room. Destro Locke was very, very strong in this fight. Big two-target cleave, and once one ad reaches 50% health, they will form into one, which I believe is called Molgoth. Now, there were different ways to approach this fight. You could split the raid. You didn't have to have, the casters that can cleave in the middle of the room. I would assume Blizzard wants you to swap sides on Mythic, maybe until later on when you can farm this fight and just deal with pushing the boss fast enough before you get your stacks, I guess, to an unhealable amount. But the big thing here was that we noticed if you pushed one boss to 50 and left one boss at a higher percent, they would still converge into one and combine their life pool. So we'll push Moltania to, I would assume, 50 here. The other boss is sitting at 70-ish%, and you'll notice when the bosses come together here in a minute, they're sitting at about, I would assume, 55, 58-ish%, and Molgoth spawns. Now, once Molgoth spawns, it is a pure patchwork single target fight. So the good thing here, Destro, very good to target cleave. Also, very good single target if you don't move a whole lot. And if you can plant in the middle of the room and not do much here, this looks to be a very, very strong Destro fight. And to a similar extent, you can sort of make Af work here if you're playing just, I guess, a cleave-based build. Demonology might not be bad if you can just push the first phase quickly, hitting one target and then blast Molgoth down here. It'll depend on what strategies emerge in Mythic progression, but this fight, if it does end up being a big cleave fight, it felt like a very, very, very good Destro fight, and a alright Af and Demo fight. Forgotten Experiments is one of the other early bosses you'll likely encounter in Aberrus, and on Heroic, this fight does differ a good bit from Mythic. On Heroic, you have to deal with one boss at a time. There are 3 bosses total, but on Mythic, the second boss and third boss jump down when the previous boss reaches half health at 50%, which means that it does add a lot of value to stack cleave if the bosses are stacked. It adds a lot of value to Destro as well, having good single target here. On Mythic, the boss we're jumping down about now is Heroic, so we don't see that, but it will give a lot of Destro to target, like just prio cleave. And even when that one boss dies at the very end, you'll have a lot of single target funnel. So I don't expect this boss to be too challenging. I ended up playing Demonology here because it was pure single target. You could play Destro after this fight too. I would assume as long as Destro's tuned properly, it's probably a pretty good Destro fight in early prog, but with it being an early fight, it might just be a Demonology Immutable Hatred fight, Nether Portal, and depending where Af lands, it might even just be a pretty good Af fight as well. It does seem relatively easy, but I think having two bosses active at once on Mythic will indeed make the fight a lot more interesting. So we will see where it goes. But Forgotten Experiments looks to be a pretty good lock fight as well. Just like the last two fights. Very big single target or two target cleave emphasis. Rashok will be one of the mid-tier bosses you encounter in Aberrus, and following suit with the last three bosses, this is also a patchwork boss. There's one target and you beat the boss or he beats you. This is going to be your sludge fist of the tier. The boss essentially has sort of these soft enrages that you can deal with by bringing him to the middle of the room to de-enrage him. But at the same time, I believe on Mythic you can only de-enrage him 5 times total or he basically kills the raid. So this is going to be a hard HPS check. I'd assume a very hard DPS check. And hopefully if tuned right, quite possibly sludge fist level of, I guess, quality when it comes to progression in a race world first setting. We ended up playing Affliction here. This is week 1 of heroic testing when Warlock had the demonic inspiration, ref minion bugs, Af was overtuned. We've gotten a lot of tuning since then. Likely at this point, this is probably going to be a demonology fight, whether it's Nether Portal or Immutable Hatred. Whatever your highest single target spec is that you can do with a lot of movement factored in. Because you can see there can be a decent bit of movement on this fight. Demonology, Affliction better than Destro, but at the same time, we'll see where Destro goes if he gets any kind of, I guess, movement changes before the raid launches. But at this point, I would like to lean towards Demonology here, probably playing an Immutable Hatred build, potentially Nether Portal depending on the fight duration and things, but Rashok, following suit with the last 3 bosses, is once again a single target / cleave prio based boss, fitting Warlock's toolkit very, very well. Now, I know I said Rashok was like the sludge fist of the tier, but Magmarox is also a patchwork fight. It sort of has Shadhar vibes to it. The dog in the hole in Nilotha. Shadhar / sludge fist. It's going to be a tight enrage, tight DPS check, tight HPS check. This boss is a lot of fun. Personally, I like a lot of patchwork kind of bosses or single target emphasis bosses. Like obviously, yes, they fit Demonology's profile very well. Warlock's profile very well. Demonology likely to play here looking at current tuning, but once again, Af not a terrible choice. If Destro is mobile, it could be a good choice here. Every Warlock spec, whether it's Demo, Destro, or Af, has good single target or prio, cleave, whatever you want to call it, emphasis. Magmarox, being a patchwork fight, takes very good advantage of Warlock's toolkit. Now, tuning still very well may come. At this point, we were playing Demonology. This is early on when Demo and Af, every spec was bugged with haste bugs and extra damage effects. So Demonology and Af are not this far ahead. We'll see where it goes, but overall, Magmarox was a good fight. It was very enjoyable during testing. It felt like a sludge fist, like a Shadhar kind of fight. It even has similar mechanics to Shadhar, where the fire pools sink if you soak them, shrink if you soak them. It felt like a pretty good fight overall. Was fun, was enjoyable, and like I said, I feel like a broken record, but it fits Warlock's damage profile pretty well. Single target fight, not an insane amount of movement. Every spec can excel here, depending on tuning. Zaskarn. This is mythic testing right here. Zaskarn is your Painsmith Rasnal of this tier. They literally used audio files from Painsmith on this fight. This fight is 0 to 100 within 2 seconds of the fight being pulled. As you can see here, there are traps, there are bombs, there are fire circles coming out, there's a knockback, there's a line. This fight felt insane on Mythic, and this is mythic testing for what it's worth. I would assume they slow down the cadence of this fight due to how quickly everything just spiraled out of control. This, once again, like most of their fights, is a single target emphasis fight, but there are some ads present here. These golems spawn around the room, which do need to be killed and or CC'd because they drop these items that you can use to defuse these large fire circles on the ground. Now, Destrolock could be very good here from a prog setting. Aflock felt a bit awkward with dots and CC and trying to roll multiple dots being on the boss. I played Demonology a good bit here. It felt pretty good. Once again, big single target emphasis. You also can get big cleave here with Implosion, Dreadstalker, Spellstorm, Demonic Strength, all of that. So it's where it depends on the strategy that emerges for this fight. It's heavy movement though, which means that while Destro can cleave a whole lot on this fight, Destro and movement are oil and water. They don't mix. It is the least mobile spec I've ever played in the history of this game. If they fix destruction, this could be a very big Destro Havoc cleave fight, whether you're cleaving boss and an ad or just 2 ads in general. Once again, I play Demo here. It could be a good Demo fight too. It's hard to beat stat cleave when you have Implosion, Dogs Chomping, Fellstorm, Demonic Strength, all the cleave Demo can just bring in general. Plus, once again, that very strong cleave profile, whether you're playing another portal or Immutable Hatred. Affliction felt okay here. It wasn't that bad maintaining Dread Touch. The problem was that if you wanted to burst multiple ads down, having a Vile Taint for them felt sort of awkward, and I don't think it's worth playing into Seed for this fight, so it's likely going to be a Demo or Destro fight. Once again, if Destro gets some mobility, it could be very, very good in this fight for control, cleave, all the above. But once again, this fight will likely be retested due to how fast the cadence was of it. Once it's tuned properly, this is Painsmith Rasnal. This should hopefully be a very, very, very cool, exciting, awesome boss if it gets tuned. Finally, we have Neltharion, which is going to be your, I guess, penultimate boss of the raid tier. Keep in mind here, once again, there'll be 2 bosses after this we'll talk about. One is Invasion of the Zakali, and one is Scale Commander Sarkalath. Invasion has not been tested. It's been canceled twice. I assume it's just not ready for testing, and Scale Commander will not be tested. So now Therion will be the second to last boss, penultimate, as long as things stay the way they are. This fight, like most of the other fights, has a single target emphasis. There are indeed ads that spawn in the intermission at times if you're chosen to be one of the classes that gets mind controlled by Neltharion. It's pretty cool. We get chosen here as Warlock. You end up going down and having to basically, if it wasn't bugged, you go down, deal with an ad, deal with your class's mind control mechanic, whatever it is, and there should be shields on the 3 ads around the room that you need to break by doing damage to them. And when you break the shield, you then bring the ad upstairs for the raid to cleave it down, and that helps you get out of phase 2. Now, during testing here on Heroic, that part of the fight was actually bugged, and you really couldn't pull the ads up from downstairs. He would randomly choose a class in the raid, say Warlock, he'd bring 4 Warlocks down. If he chose Druid, he'd bring 2 or 3 Druids down. If he chose a Mage, well, there'd be 2 Mages going down. If he chose Monk, well, there'd be 1 Monk going down. And same with 1 Hunter and 1 Rogue, but, it is what it is. So if that mechanic stays the way that it is, where it chooses, 1 class at a time, it's going to be interesting to see the actual comps that guilds choose to bring to this fight, because some mind control mechanics are actually easier to deal with than others. Druids were just shapeshifting over and over. Warlocks have an ad to deal with. Warriors were blade storming. Mages were, I think, arcane explosioning, and 1 lusted for us when he went down. So it'll be interesting to see. We played AF here early on, ended up playing Demo here. It'll depend on what the strat ends up being in this fight. I could see Destro being okay when it comes to ad and boss cleave, but it's sort of RNG. I'd assume this is likely a Demo or AF fight, depending on tuning. Once again, like every other boss so far, a lot of single target emphasis. You have stat cleave with Demo if you want, with Implosion and Dreadlash and Dogs Chomping and Fellstorm Demonic Strength. You also have just decent single target with AF. You want to play that. Sustained AF, sustained damage, all the above. Not an incredible burst like Demo can put out, but you can sustain a lot of damage on a fight like this, where you have that, once again, single target emphasis. So we'll see where it goes. This is a heavy movement fight. Lots of movement. So Destro might be a little sketchy in this fight, but depending where tuning goes, I think all 3 specs here are potentially possible. I'm leaning more myself, though, towards Demonology and Affliction. Now, like I mentioned, both Scale Commander Sarkalath, which is the final boss of the raid, and Assault of the Zakali have not been tested yet. They've clarified there will be no testing of Scale Commander Sarkalath. However, there should be testing of Assault of the Zakali. Now, this fight, I've read over it a bit. Basically, shortly after the battle begins, Warlord, whatever, calls upon the might of his warriors. It sounds like waves of ads spawn in, and you just fight them. Upon reaching 15% health, Warlord Cagney begins his final assault. There's ads and things. It could be a really cool fight. When I open the journal and see this many models, I get scared. So, it could be Hellfire Assault. I'm not really sure. It depends how the fight's approached. I mean, Demonology, once again, has a very good stat cleave profile. If it's stat cleave like Primal Council, I mean, Demo, Destro, AF are all fine there. To a similar extent, if it's like permanent stack AoE, Destro, Inferno cleave value could be very, very, very high in this fight. If it's 2-3 targets, could be a good Destro fight. Really depends. Have to see where it goes. This weekend, it should be open for testing when the raid opens on normal, but we're not really sure. We haven't seen it on Heroic or Mythic at all, and they've canceled normal testing for 2 weeks in a row because of, I'd assume, this fight being likely just not ready. But we'll see where it goes. Still a decent amount of time left. It could be a pretty cool fight. Now, Scale Commander Sarkalath, this, from what I've read, again, it does indeed appear to be a pretty solid single target or cleave based fight. There are ads that spawn in stage 2 somewhere in here when I believe he does his like shadow breath across the room where you cleave them down, but it sounds like, yeah, leaving behind images of himself, but it sounds like these ads are stacked that you cleave them down. This sounds like a pretty good demo fight. Could be a decent AF fight depending where tuning's at. Destro could be okay-ish too. Once again, highest simming spec in the game when it comes to single target, but I mean, odd CD timings with Infernal being 3 minutes long. Movement is, if movement's a thing in the fight, it's not going to be very good, but we'll see. It, once again, it feels like a very strong, potentially, demo fight reading over the journal. And for what it's worth, this fight looks really, really cool. So we'll see where it goes. I'd say demo, potentially AF, maybe Destro, probably demo or AF, and Zakali, we'll see. I would assume some AoE meat grinder. There's one fight per raid, which is the AoE meat grinder. It was, what was it in Sepulchre? The 4 Elders fight, whatever it was. It was in Vault, it was Primal Council. This is likely your meat grinder. You got to throw melee bone somewhere. Looks to be a pretty decent range raid so far. But then again, there's some melee they're doing pretty good. So we'll see where it goes. But yeah, TLDR, this looks like a pretty good Warlock raid. A lot of single target emphasis or stat cleave emphasis, prio emphasis. That's Warlock damage profiles. So thanks for watching, guys. That should hopefully wrap it up. Hopefully it gave you all a good look and or general understanding on how Warlock looks heading into Aberrus. Once again, this is only heroic testing. We've tested 2 bosses on Mythic, but it was the first boss and Zaskarn, which was a bit overtuned. It was a fun boss, but a little bit overtuned. So we'll see where that goes. I wouldn't be surprised if we test them again, just due to the nature of how they were. But Lock looks pretty good this raid. A lot of single target, stacked, cleave damage profiles, which Warlock's good at doing. We feel much better than how we felt in Vault of the Incarnates testing. Number 1, we were undertuned, but number 2, just the fights just feel better. Lock feels good heading into Aberrus, and we'll see where Mythic takes it. Like always, any Week Warriors add-ons and profiles, links to Twitch and Discord down below are free for you guys. I also want to give one final shout out to all my patrons. Thank you guys for all support on Patreon. Once again, a million times. I really appreciate it. If you're looking at supporting on Patreon, should be a link up here as well as down below. It's worth mentioning the 10.1 Warlock PTR spreadsheet will indeed be live in about a week or so. I'm shooting for next weekend. The tier 3 Felgar rank or higher of Patreon gets early access to that if you're interested. And yeah, so we'll see where it goes. I'm curious if the demo tier set is still bugged or if it's intended to work this way without GFG extensions with Felgar being a thing. I'm still worried about Destro's mobility in the raid. It is the highest simming spec in the game now, but it's one of the least played specs in Vault of the Incarnates for a handful of reasons. Damage is good, but in the end, when you can't really deal damage effectively, there's problems. But, you know, so we'll see where it goes. For all that being said, once again, thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like and sub buttons below. It helps out a ton, and I will catch you all again soon on stream. Peace.